Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Brian Bileci. I'm so glad you have joined us tonight for another class in Hebrew as we look at Parashat Tisa from the 30th chapter of the book of Exodus. And we're so glad you have joined us. And if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure you do that so you can be a part of these wonderful classes. And also, if you're on Facebook Live right now, make sure you comment and ask questions, and we're going to try to dive into the Hebrew language tonight. So glad you're with us, and I am Rabbi Brian Bileci, and you have joined our classroom tonight as we jump into the language of Hebrew, the language of Ivrit. So if you're out there and you're ready to jump in today, we're just so grateful that you are here, and we know that we have a whole classroom of those that want to learn some Hebrew today. So if that's you, we're going to jump into our lesson, all right? Let's go ahead and take a look at our Hebrew alphabet, our Aleph Bet, and we're going to take a look at how the language of Hebrew works. All right, we're looking at the Aleph Bet, and the Aleph Bet is the alphabet. The Aleph Bet actually is based upon the first two letters of the Hebrew language, which the Hebrew language has 22 consonant letters that we use to write the letters from right to left. From right to left. And the way that we pronounce these 22 consonant letters is through a nikud vocalization, which nikud means the dots, or literally the pointings, what we call dots and dashes underneath the letter. So for instance, if you take a look at our Aleph Bet, you'll see that we do have A, E, I, O, and U, but it's pronounced A, E, O, U. And sometimes when we're reading the Torah, we don't even have vowel markings in the Torah at all. We only have indicators, vowel indicators, like the Aleph, the Hey, the Vav, the Yud, and the Ein. And so we use a formula called C plus V, which is consonant plus vowel, and that gives us the open syllable, or we can also have C plus V plus C, a closed syllable, as in shalom. Shalom, transliterated shalom, S-H-A, sha, and lom, L-O-M. That is from the sheen with the kamatz underneath it. So you look underneath the letter for the vowel, and you'll learn that kamatz belongs to a family of the A vowel pronounced A, kamatz, and we have kamatz malay for long. We have a patach, which is just one line for medium, and then we have chataf patach, which is the one line that is shortened by the shva next to it, two dots on the right-hand side of the vowel marking underneath the letter. So if we look at shalom, we see kamatz, and that is going to give us an ah sound. So kamatz is very important when it comes to understanding the long ah sound pronounced for the word shalom, shalom. So we see shalom is used in the Hebrew culture to refer to peace or wholeness in the Jewish world and in Israel and throughout the world where there is Hebrew spoken. We even hear a double portion of that called shalom, shalom. So you can greet someone and say shalom, which could mean peace or wholeness, but it's also used for hello, or even better to say a double portion of that, shalom, shalom, perfect peace. This is seen in Isaiah 26, verse 3, I will give you perfect peace whose mind is stayed upon him, upon the Lord. And we have the idea of the perfect peace or double peace, a double portion of peace, shalom, shalom. We also use shalom for asking, how are you? To a man, we'd say, ma shlomcha. Notice ma, notice a form of shalom, shlom, and then the suffix cha. Ma means what? Shalom is the peace or wholeness that we were talking about. And then the suffix at the end, C-H-A, cha, from the chaf sofit and the kamatz, is actually the suffix that means masculine singular, your peace. So we're asking, how are you? But we're really asking, what's your peace? What's your peace like today? Or for a female, we'll add the suffix ech for ma shlomech. Why don't you try that? Say ma and say shlom. Ma, shlom, and now add the suffix for the man, cha. Cha. You need some chutzpah to say, ma shlom cha. How are you? Or ech at the end of shlom for ma shlomech. Ma shlomech for a female. So when you look at shalom, when reading Hebrew, you start with the letter in yellow there, the letter sheen with a kamatz underneath for sha. Sha. And then we close out with a closing syllable, lom. Lom. Shalom. Shalom. So we see that's how Hebrew works. Now, remember that some letters, as in the word shalom, have a final form at the end of the word. For instance, look at the letter mem in this list of 5 final letters, chaf sofit, mem sofit, nun sofit, fe sofit, and sadi sofit. So the mem looks different at the end of the word when you see mem sofit. The mem sofit here at the end is closed in like a box, when normally the mem, if you see it on the left here, looks a little bit more rugged at the top and is a picture of a water symbol. Because remember, the aleph, beit, is a series of pictographs, like aleph. Aleph is a picture of an ox head and symbolizes strength. Beit is a house and is speaking of the family living in the house. Gimel is camel, which is a gamal in Hebrew. So the gimel is a picture of a gamal, a camel, which is a beast of burden. It can also be a beast that carries blessing, like the camel would carry the wealth of the rich nomad wandering through the wilderness. And so we see that the dalet is a picture of a door, and its ancient pictograph was like a tent door that was triangular in shape. Now, these are just the first 4. You know, you could relate those first 4 to letters you're probably familiar with in Greek. If you've ever been a part of a fraternity or sorority, or you've been a part of a college where you had them on campus, or you've just heard about them, you're probably familiar with the word alpha, which is the first letter of the Greek alphabet. But you'll notice the similarity to aleph. Aleph, and of course the F and the PH are synonymous. The only difference is the A at the end of alpha. And aleph and alpha are of the same root. The ancient picture of the aleph is an ox head that looks like an A turned upside down or on its side. It is like the face of the ox with its horns. The letter beit, you can start kind of seeing a little bit of a B shape in the Paleo-Hebrew, the letter beit, or beta, or modern Greek would pronounce it vita. And then there's dalet. Remember that triangle of dalet, a triangular tent door? Well, look at the delta. And you can see the similarity between dalet and delta. Dalet and delta. So that's just the first 4. And then you go down the line in Hebrew, the 5th letter, he, you can see if you drop the H, you get the E of he for sound. And we have epsilon, or pronounced epsilon today in modern Greek. Other letters get a little more confusing, like the letter vav, sometimes pronounced as a W by some, and we have vav or wow. And then we also have the fricative sound of the vav, the v, when it becomes f versus v. It becomes fricative, and you can even have like the German F sound, as in Volkswagen. A Volkswagen is really a Volkswagen, or a folks' wagon, the people's car, the people's wagon. So the folks have a wagon, Volkswagen. So the V would actually be pronounced like an F, and then the W would be pronounced as a V in German, which is what Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek was translated into before it was translated into English, kind of in between Latin, then became German, and then became English. So, for instance, that would give us the reason why we have sometimes a transliteration issue when it comes to the Hebrew. So remember, you can actually compare the Hebrew with the Greek and see in many charts like this one that there is a correlation between Aleph and Alpha, Beit and Beta, Gimel and Gamma, Dalet and Delta, He with Epsilon or Epsilon, the Vav with the vowel, which is obsolete in Greek, but it used to be there. And you can go down the line and see the correlation. So again, the Aleph and the Beit are like the alphabet that we use to explain or rattle off the alphabet, the Aleph Beit. So when you talk about Hebrew and how it works, and you look at these ancient pictographs, you can see that even like for the letter Lamed, we use it for learning. For instance, Lamed is like Lomed, Lomed. Ani lomed ivrit. I am learning Hebrew. Ani lomed ivrit. Now let's talk about that mem again. Remember, the mem was a picture of water. So the way you say water in Hebrew is maim. Maim, like the song we sing. Shafta maim besason, memane ha-Yeshua. Shafta maim besason, memane ha-Yeshua. Maim, 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 maim. Oh, maim besason, maim, 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 maim. Oh, maim besason. Hey, 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 hey. Maim, 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 maim. Besason, maim, 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 besason. And that says, with joy we will draw water from the wells of salvation. And in fact, we talked about how powerful water is in the world of Israel and the Jewish people and Hebrew and the languages that have been affected by the Hebrew tongue. And so we have to understand that water is a very important image within the Jewish world. In fact, you have a water drawing ceremony for the Feast of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And we have water like water that's drawn from a well, like we saw in the 4th chapter of John. When it comes to the Hebrew language, we have to remember that we start with 5 letters at a time. So the Aleph Beit starts with the Aleph, then the letter Beit, and then we're going to go all the way down to the letter Hey, and you can count these on your finger. You can actually count these letters. So we've got a couple friends there. I have a friend, Shimshon, he's saying Mashlamcha, Mashlamcha. He's also saying Shalom, shalom, because he heard us talking about how to greet someone. Now, remember, when we study Hebrew, we focus a lot as Messianic believers on revealing that Yeshua is the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and continue looking at the power of looking at Yeshua as the Messiah of Israel, and how we can relate to this wonderful teaching of Tisa that is our study today. This is Exodus chapter 30, verse number 1. Exodus 30 and verse 1. In the Tree of Life version, it reads, Then Adonai spoke to who? He spoke to Moses. Spoke to Moses, saying, When you tally the sum, or actually in Hebrew, Tisa, of Bnei Israel, then by numbering them, then every man must pay a ransom for his soul to Adonai when you count them, so that no plague will fall on them. How strange of a statement, right? That we should count. Now, Tisa comes from a root, laset here in the infinitive form, and you see the root letters, nasa, as the shoresh, nasa. Now, it means to lift, to carry, or to bear. To lift, to carry, or to bear. Nasa is actually the root for ki tisa. And there is a basic logic behind this that is very important when it comes to Hebrew. Sometimes we have strong letters that retain their structure as far as looking at the basic 3-letter root of a word. But we also know that sometimes letters drop out of the running when it comes to the conjugation of the verb. So when you talk about this root nasa, the noon is going to kind of go away, and instead we're going to have ki tisa. Ki literally can mean because or as a result of something, and tisa, the letter tav, is there instead of the letter noon. So we have the sheen and the aleph, which are still holding their place, second and third place, if you will, in the root of the word. Now, again, this root nasa, we see it in naso et rosh. Lift up the heads in Parashat Naso, Numbers 4:22. When it comes to this root, we see in Numbers 4:22, it says, take a census of the sons of Gershon also by their father's house and by their clan. So really what we're translating take a census is really lift up the heads. Naso et rosh. Now, if you remember the letter that represents Rosh, it's the letter Resh. Resh. So Rosh comes from Resh. Resh, a head, or that which comes first. In fact, we saw also Rosh in reference to the first words of the Torah. Bereshit. Bereshit. When we look at Bereshit bara Elohim, which means, or is translated, in the beginning God created, et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, the heavens and the earth, we see that Bereshit has a prefix in front of it, and that is the letter Beit, the letter Beit. Now, let's go back for a minute, and let's go back through our letters that we kind of jumped the gun a little bit, but let's go back to our Aleph Beit, and let's go do the first 5 letters, okay? 1, 2, 3. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. Vav, Zain, Chet, Tet, Yud. Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech. Ein, Pe, Tzadi, Kuf, Resh, Shin, Tav. All right, that's all 22 letters. Again, 5 letters at a time. Count on your fingers from Aleph to Hey, and just learn them 5 letters at a time. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. Now, you'll hear Israelis say Bet, because they want to differentiate from the word Beit that means house of. Because remember, the picture of the letter Beit is a house. But I tend to pronounce it the way it's spelled, which is more like Beit versus Bet. But you're not wrong if you say Bet. It's just sometimes different parts of the world will pronounce things differently. And I believe the reason why it's pronounced more Bet is because even though it's spelled Beit, it is to differentiate between house of and the letter, which is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So we have Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zain, Chet, Tet, Yud, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ein, Pe, Sadi, Kuf, Resh, and the last 2 are Shin, Tav. So when we're joining these letters together with their vowel, we look for the vowel underneath. So let's just go back to the root again, and let's look at the vowels underneath the root. We have the letter Nun, and we also have the kamatz underneath it. Now, what is the kamatz? Okay, let's go back to the vowel system again. If you see lines, it's usually an A vowel pronounced A. So you'll either see a T, a line, or a line with 2 dots. Kamatz, kamatz malay, patach, or hataf patach. And just know at this level of learning Hebrew, you just need to know if you see lines, usually it's a vowel pronounced A. If you see multiple dots, you're going to pronounce from the sound you hear in eggs, because these multiple dots are going to sound like eggs or look like eggs. In this case, when you go to 1 dot, you're going to think simply the dot on the lowercase I in English, and think upside down, the dots underneath instead of on top, and that will give us the I vowel pronounced E. E. So we have A, E, E. And then we have the vav with the dot on top for, oh, look at that bird in the air, because the dot's floating in the air. And we say that the vav with the dot on top is called a cholam vav. The cholam is the dot. The vav is what's holding it in the air. If I remove the vav, then it's a cholam chaser. And then I have the rare time that kamatz is used for a medium O sound for kamatz chatuf, or even a shorter O sound for chataf kamatz. Times that we memorize those are rare, so we kind of don't need to focus on them too much at this stage. But the vav with the dot on the side instead of the dot on top gives us the sound that we say when we see a purse on a woman's side. The vav with the dot on the side is the U sound, or the shuruk. We'll go a little further and we'll see if we have a shuruk or the cholam in one of our words. And actually, we did have the cholam vav in shalom. So in this case, we're only working with the A vowel here, the kamatz. And that is the first kamatz we see under letter nun if we're reading from right to left. So we have the root, the nun, the shin, and the aleph. Now you say, what's the aleph doing there? Well, the aleph is just kind of holding its place. It's just there holding its spot. So even though we sometimes don't understand like why the aleph is there, you think, can I just leave the aleph off? No, you actually cannot leave the aleph off. You need to just realize it has a purpose, okay? So when it comes to the root, we have the nun with the kamatz, the shin with the kamatz, and then there's the aleph, and it's just pronounced nasa, as if the aleph was an A, but the A vowel is actually underneath the letter shin, and the aleph is just there for structure. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at another way to use this. We could say nasa enaim. Nasa enaim, to lift the eyes. Nasa enaim. The word for eyes here is like ein. Remember, we have the 16th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is ein. And the picture of the ein is actually an eye. So we take ein, and then it changes to enaim, plural, eyes, enaim, enaim. And this means to lift the eyes, nasa enaim. Or like the word nasi, which means prince, or someone who is lifted up. So a nasi is a prince. So every one of the 12 tribes had a prince that was lifted up as the head of the tribes. We also have the word for the golden calf, the egel. And the golden calf is in this week's portion of Tisa. It's interesting, nasa is also the same root that we use to say we should not lift up God's name in vain, or we should be creating idols. That's part of the 10 words of the 10 commandments, which are the Aseret HaDibrot, or the Decalogue, the 10 words. So egel is a calf, and they made the egel of zahav, which is the metal of gold, zahav, just like the Ark of the Covenant was made out of pure gold. Or how about something that you're familiar with? I took a picture and showed it to you of me in Israel next to a menorah that is made of gold, zahav, just like the Dome of the Rock where the temple once stood, a memorial in Islam to Muhammad. The gold dome also is made of zahav. And the menorah itself was crafted from one piece of gold. So this is a menorah that is made from the Temple Institute for the next temple in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. Now remember, when you're talking about the temple, you're talking about a place that had much gold in it, especially that menorah. It was absolutely beautiful. Here's a model of the temple. That temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. And the original temple was Solomon's temple, and it was destroyed in 586 BC. So there was a first temple and second temple. The first temple is Solomon's. The second temple is many times called Herod's temple, King Herod. They often called him Herod the Great because of all of the reconstruction he did in the land of Israel. So Zahav is the word for gold, and we know that the temple had a lot of gold in it. You can see in this picture, there's gold around the temple. This is an artist's rendering of what the temple would look like in Jerusalem presently today. Now, when it comes to Zahav, which is gold, we also know it's one of the metals, one of the highest metals used for the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, and the menorah is the menorah. So the menorah or menorah was made of zahav. We also call Jerusalem Yerushalayim di Zahav, the Jerusalem of gold. And kesef is another metal used, and that is silver. Kesef, silver. Or how about the bronze of the brazen altar? Nechoshet. So you see how in Hebrew, if you just take a look at the way these words are spelled, like nasi, we have the letter nun and the kamatz underneath it, just like the root, the nun and the kamatz. But then instead of another kamatz under the letter shin, we use one dot under the letter shin, which would give us she, elongated by the yud following it, floating in the air there like it's pulling that dot across the length of the word, nasi. And the aleph is just there for structure, nasi. So if you were to remove that aleph, you'd still be able to see nasi, but it wouldn't have the root. It would not have the root. Very important to understand that. Now, when it comes to nechoshet, notice what is under the letter nun. Under the letter nun is a shva. Now, we learned about the shva over the last couple of weeks. How important the shva is. There is either a shva na that sounds under the first letter, or a shva nach that can bring it to the word to a glottal stop, or the syllable to a glottal stop. Now, under the letter beit for Bereshit, it's a shva na, so we have to pronounce it a short e sound and have Bereshit. Bereshit bara Elohim. Bereshit. That's a shva na. Those are the two dots that look like a colon in English grammar. But those two dots have to be pronounced under the first word. Shva na. So the first shva you see under here is a short e sound because we learned that the e vowel has the sere yud, and sagol yud being a long e, and then sagol, 3 dots and a downward triangle, a medium e, and then the 5 dots, which is a sagol, and the shva next to it, called chataf sagol, as short, and then one final form of the e. And a shva na can give us an e sound, or a glottal stop if it's a shva nach. So the last option there is a shva, and the shva requires you to use a shva to spell shva. So notice that we have the shva, which is needed here not only in nechoshet, but it is here a shva na. Very short, but it's used to keep the moving sound of the letter shin. All right, so we have a shva na here, but we could also have a shva nach in a word. So we'll see if we can address that in a bit. Shva nach. Oh, here's a perfect example. From beshalach, we had the root lishloach, to send. So we have the lamed with 1 dot underneath it called a hirik, and that would be li, li, and then the sheen has a shava underneath it, bringing us to a glottal stop, lishloach. So This shva is a shva nach, a shva nach, lish loach, shva nach. So you always have to make sure you know what kind of shva you're dealing with. In this case, it's a shva na for ne, and then the chet with a cholam, a dot floating in the air for cho, necho, and then the letter shin with a sagol underneath, nechoshet, which is bronze, bronze. And what was bronze was the mizbeach, mizbeach. So what is the letter mem with the hirik underneath sound like? It's me, as in who is me, right? The word who in English, but me in Hebrew, who is me? Me, and now this is actually not who in this actual word. Mizbeach is a word all by itself, but the mem with the hirik underneath would give us the mi. And then we have a sheva nach underneath the letter zayin. Miz, miz. And then we have the letter beit with a sagol, multiple dots giving us the look of eggs for so be, miz be. And then what's interesting is under the letter chet, which is ch, we have a furtive patach. A furtive patach. What does that mean? The furtive patach steals the show and sounds before the consonant. We might think it should be pronounced mizbecha, but no, it's mizbeach, mizbeach. The actual ah sound sounds before the ch of the letter chet. It's called a furtive patach, mizbeach. So you have to pronounce the end ah, not cha, mizbeach. What is that? The altar. And the altar was made of nechoshet, bronze. Just like the menorah is made of zahav, gold. So basically, that ends just our look at the Torah portion. And I want you to know that when it comes to the Hebrew, we actually are able to study the Hebrew in such a way where we can read it one letter at a time and then look for the vowel underneath and then go to the next letter to see if we have a shivana or shivanach or a certain vowel, what we call a tenuah gedula, a long vowel, which would make the consonant stand on its own as a consonant plus a vowel. Or sometimes we have a medium length vowel that's shortening and it's going to come to a glottal stop with a shivanach. So you have to be able to know the length of the vowel to sometimes know which shiva are you dealing with. Now, we do have a question here, and I know Joseph was having some sound problems on Zoom, and he's on our Zoom family tonight. So we see here that Joseph says in Genesis 22:1, the Lord tested Abraham. The word for test is nasa. Please clarify what's the difference. Let me just give you the root letters. The root letters for Genesis 22:1, where it says tempt, is not nasa that we're using here for Tisa. It is the nun, the samech, and the hey as the root, which means completely something different than the nun, the shin, and the aleph. So it's a completely different root. So you can't just look at the fact that in English we spell it out, nasa. You have to look at the root letters, which is not nun, shin, aleph, but nun, samech, hey for nasa. Completely different. The letter nun is the beginning letter of the root. It goes to the letter shin, which is a pictograph of teeth. And we have finally the letter aleph, which is an ox head. So that is the root of Tisa, nasa. Genesis 22, though, in verse number 1, is dealing with a different root that still starts with the letter nun, but it moves on to use the letter samech, which is a prop of support. And then finally we have, from Samech, we have Hey, and the Hey is a window. So completely different letters. So hopefully that makes sense. And I think it's important for us to see that the root letters are different, and that will really change our understanding of what the text is actually saying. It's not saying to lift up, it's saying to test. So it's a completely different root. In fact, I'll go ahead and take this picture of the root. Yes, there's the root. The other we know is completely different because we're talking about a root that is for ki tisa, and that's nasa. So I want you to notice that. Notice that root. You see how the letters are different? The nun, the samech, and the hey is not the same as the nun, the sheen, and the aleph. Completely different root. We could also take a look at the fact that when you're looking at the letters here of the root, and we see ki tisa in the text, we already know the English doesn't seem to make any sense. Now, why is it saying to tally the sum? Well, the idea is to lift the heads, like as you see in Numbers 4:22, as it was done for all of the tribes of Israel, especially like here in Numbers 4:22, which is a census for the sons of Gershon, the Gershonites. We see the lifting of the head is the way they would count. And many times, Jews do not count by number when they're counting heads. They might use a verse to count or a blessing to count because they don't want people to be treated like they're just a number. They want to make sure they understand that they're a blessing. So that's very common in Hebrew. Like you could say, you were counting like this: Baruch, Atah, Adonai, Eloheinu, Melech, Ha-Olam, Asher, Kishana. You can actually go through a blessing, and when you get through a blessing that has 10 words, you would know when you're done with the blessing, you've counted 10 people, like a minyan to start Shabbat. So that's very powerful to see that. Now, any other questions on that? Also, we've got Andrew that's on tonight, says Shalom. Brian, got my name spelled as Brain, and sometimes I get called Bible Brain, and I'm just one that knows how to study the scriptures and know where to get the resources, but we can all be a Bible Brain out there if we just study the Word of God, amen? All right, so hopefully that answered Joseph's question by looking at the root, and the root was a different root, completely different root. All right, so it is now 7:54. I'd love to just kind of close out tonight because I feel like, if we go any longer, we're going to be slipping into bedtime. So I don't want to, even though I know it is morning time in India, and can't wait for our afternoon study on Saturday on Shabbat for John chapter 11. And we've already covered chapter 10, the Good Shepherd, and grateful for that. So if you guys are ready, we're going to go ahead and close out with the Aharonic benediction. So stretch your hands for the blessing tonight. Yirechacha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ye'er Adonai panav elecha v'nihoneka, Yisa Adonai v'lecha, v'asen lacha shalom. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you, be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you perfect peace, and Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace. In the name of Yeshua the Messiah we pray. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen. All right, everyone. God bless you guys. See you soon.